if they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard.
All the U.S. so-called negotiations are frauds. They just want to make Iran unsafe and divided.
The wave of nationwide protests, which began in late December 2025, is not just another chapter in the Islamic Republic's long cycle of unrest. This time it was different. It wasn't about the scale or slogans, but the trigger of a total breakdown of economic credibility that turned daily life into a mere futility and pushed once cautious social groups into open revolt. Hundreds of demonstrators have been killed in Iran since the government shut down access to the internet on the 8th of January. Security forces began to break through a communications blackout while struggling to contain some of the largest protests since the Islamic Republic was founded in 1979. Videos from Iran show huge crowds in cities including Tehran, Mashhad and Yazd, chanting for an end to the Islamic Republic and praising Iran's deposed monarchy. Some videos from Tehran also show buildings set on fire. And then on Tuesday, US President Donald Trump said to Iranians that help is on its way. He urged protesters to continue their demonstration, take over the institutions. In a post on Truth Social, he dropped the term MIGA, suggesting "Make Iran Great Again," and announced that he had cancelled all his meetings with Iranian officials. So how did Iran get here? What was life like in Iran before the 1979 revolution? What led to the revolution and a change in Iran's fate? Who could potentially lead Iran if the regime falls? All these and more on WION Wideangle this week. Anti-government protests have erupted all across Iran's 31 provinces in a wave of unrest, marking the biggest challenge to the regime in years. The protests began in Tehran's bazaars over rampant inflation, but have now spread to more than 180 cities and towns across Iran, morphing into general protests against the regime. Protests began because of the concerns over inflation, when the prices of basic goods dramatically spiked, with some products vanishing from shelves altogether. Demonstrators' slogans have demanded a fundamental change to their political system. Videos show people holding the flag of Iran's monarchy, deposed in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran's government attempted to alleviate the pressure by offering direct cash handouts of almost $7 per month to the entire population, but the move failed to quell the unrest. So how are the protests different this time? The current protests began with the shopkeepers and merchants who were seen as loyal to the regime. Shopkeepers have always played a crucial role as kingmakers across Iran's recent history. It was their support of clerics that eventually helped the Islamic Revolution of 1979 succeed, giving the revolutionaries a financial backbone as they struggled to overthrow the Shah or monarch.
Basically, it's the dramatic situation, the deterioration of the economy, the decrease in the value of the Toman, of the Iranian Real. So inflation puts people outside, and This is important because it hasn't been triggered by ideology. It has been triggered because of an ability of the regime to preserve the macroeconomic equilibriums, balances. So the regime is unable to rule, basically. If you can't protect your currency and the prices, the level of price, you are not able to rule, actually.
The Iranian Revolution is regarded as one of the most important geopolitical events of the 20th century. It set the template for a new form of politics and ushered in a deeply conservative theocratic state that exists to this day. Before Ayatollah Khamenei's revolution transformed the Iranian society, Iran was a very different world. For close to 40 years, Iran was ruled by Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, from 1941 to 1979. Shah led the country through a series of sweeping changes. Mohammad Reza was the eldest son of Reza Shah Pahlavi, an army officer who became the ruler of Iran and founder of the Pahlavi dynasty in 1925. The autocracy of Shah rule was amplified after the 1953 coup, in which the United States and the United Kingdom helped restore him to power, after a 2-year standoff with the parliament forced him to flee. Mohammad Reza imposed aggressive economic development policies, including the modernization program known as the White Revolution. The program included land reform, nationalization of forests, sale of state-owned enterprises to the private sector, a profit-sharing plan for industrial workers, and the formation of a literacy corps to eradicate illiteracy in rural areas. The White Revolution also granted Iranian women the right to vote, increased women's minimum legal marriage age to 18, and improved women's legal rights in divorce and child custody matters. The White Revolution gained the Shah new support from the rural poor and the urban working class, but he did face continuing political criticism from those who felt that the reforms did not go far, and religious criticism from those who believed westernization to be antithetical to Islam. All these reforms were opposed by Iran's clergy, in particular Ayatollah Khamenei. Opposing the Shah and the White Revolution, Khamenei led the 1963 uprising. Khomeiни's activities eventually led to his exile to Iraq in 1964. Widespread dissatisfaction among the lower classes, merchants and students led to the growth of support for Ayatollah Ruhollah Khamenei, a religious leader living in exile in Paris. Rioting in Iran's major cities brought down 4 successive governments as the Iranian Revolution gained momentum. The program overturned the traditional power structures in the country, heightening tensions that led to Mohammad Reza's downfall. On January 16, 1979, the Shah left the country and Khamenei assumed control. The 1979 revolution succeeded because 3 critical power centers aligned. The people, the clergy, and the Bazaar merchants united against the monarchy. This coalition was built through years of organizing, through labor unions, through the economic leverage of the Bazaar. When those institutions moved together, the monarchy fell, following the March 1979 Islamic public referendum, in which 98% approved the shift to an Islamic republic. The new government began drafting the present-day constitution of an Islamic Republic of Iran. Ayatollah Khamenei emerged as the supreme leader of Iran. With religious fervor running high, Khamenei consolidated his authority and set out to transform Iran into a religious state. In November 1979, the United States imposed its first sanctions on Iran, justified by the seizure of American hostages held at the US Embassy in Tehran. In December 1979, a new Iranian constitution was approved, naming Khamenei as Iran's political and religious leader for life. Under his rule, Iranian women were denied equal rights and required to wear a veil. Western culture was banned and traditional Islamic laws were reinstated. Thousands of political dissidents were executed during his decade of rule.
So he has pushed forward a confrontation with the other branch of Islam, which is Sunni Islam, and this hasn't helped the situation in Middle East, knowing that 90% or at least 85% of Muslims worldwide are Sunni and not Shia. So this stance supported by Khomeini was quite bellicist. They pushed for more wars, more conflict in the region, which happened.
After the Ayatollah Khomeini died in 1989, his successor, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was chosen by the Assembly of Experts the next day. Gradual democratization began in Iran in the early 1990s, culminating in a free election in 1997. Khamenei established the system of rule by the Shiite Muslim clerics that secured his place in the eyes of hardliners as the unquestionable authority below only that of God. At the same time, Khamenei built the paramilitary Revolutionary Guard into the dominant force in Iran's military and internal politics. Its international arm, the Quds Force, pieced together the axis of resistance, the collection of pro-Iranian proxies stretching from Yemen to Lebanon, and that for years gave Iran considerable power across the region. The first major threat to Khamenei's grip was the reform movement that advocated for giving greater power to elected officials. Something Khamenei's hardline supporters feared would lead to dismantling the Islamic Republic's system. The Revolutionary Guard and Iran's other security agencies crushed waves of protests that followed the failure of the reform movement. In 2009, huge nationwide protests erupted over allegations of vote rigging. Under the weight of sanctions, economic protests broke out in 2017 and in 2019. More nationwide protests broke out in 2022 over the death of Mahsa Amini, after police detained her for not wearing her mandatory headscarf properly. Hundreds were killed in crackdowns on the protests and hundreds more arrested. The successive protests showed the strains in Iran's theocratic system and laid bare widespread resentment of clerical rule, corruption, and economic troubles. Inside Iran, civil society activists and political prisoners understand the power dynamics. They understand that war would trigger intensified repression and set them back by decades. They realize that pursuing violent revolution would prove catastrophically destructive. The US-based human rights activists news agency said that it had so far confirmed the death of 2,403 protesters. Iran's government has escalated efforts to choke off information amid unrest by enforcing a prolonged nationwide internet blackout, seizing satellite dishes and CCTV recordings. The Iranian regime has used internet shutdowns several times before. Blocking the internet stops citizens from communicating with the outside world and each other. And it limits opposition organizing, because people can't join protests if they don't know where they are. Experts say internet shutdowns also obscure the international gaze, allowing the regime to crack down on protesters in the dark. Iranians are turning to Starlink satellite internet to bypass nationwide internet shutdowns imposed amid ongoing protests. Starlink terminals, though illegal in Iran, are being used by activists to allow limited information flow to continue. The Iranian government has also been attempting to jam Starlink, one of the technologies Iranians are using to sidestep the restrictions on communication. Elon Musk's SpaceX is providing free internet access via its Starlink satellite service to users in Iran as the country's regime continues its crackdown. Iran's move to cut internet access during ongoing mass protests is the latest example of how governments use digital blackouts to suppress dissent. Let's look at other recent instances where governments have utilized the internet to silence protests, target opponents, or conceal conflicts. In September 2025, Nepal's government implemented a ban on several social media platforms, leading to widespread public unrest. Thousands of students and young citizens took to the streets across the country, demanding the lifting of the ban, action against corruption, and protection of free speech. Also, in September last year, Taliban authorities plunged Afghanistan into a 48-hour internet blackout on the orders of the supreme leader. While the Taliban cited preventing immoral activities and vice as reasons, the indefinite blackout blocked social media and disrupted essential services, drawing condemnation for control and censorship. The army and rival paramilitaries in Sudan have regularly used telecommunications blackouts as a weapon of war in the conflict, which started in April 2023. In November 2025, Sudan recorded at least 4 major shutdowns in the year, and a nationwide blackout in 2024 affected nearly 30 million Sudanese for more than a month. Iran has been witnessing massive protests across major cities over the past few days, in what some see as the first real challenge to the rule of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei since the Islamic Revolution 4 decades ago. While the world is fixated on the violent anti-government protests, on Monday hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets across several Iranian cities, chanting slogans for the Iranian government and Khamenei, a completely different picture. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian joined a large pro-government rally in Tehran. Pezeshkian has also pledged to address mounting economic grievances in the country, saying his government is ready to listen to protesters. As mass protests tremble Iran, a critical question is now emerging. Who could potentially lead Iran if the regime collapses?
Either the return of Pahlavi or a transition with a small share of the mullahs regime taking part in the new transition, or definitely a civil war to wipe out the mullahs definitely from the power and install a new parliamentary republic.
From an exiled crown prince to a former president to security forces, we look at the key figures that could shape Iran's future if the current system fails. One name that re-emerged is that of Reza Pahlavi, the former crown prince who was 16 years old when he fled to the United States, before his family's dynastic rule was overthrown in the revolution of 1979. The eldest son of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he was the first in the line to inherit the oil-rich thousand-year-old empire. Now at the age of 65, nearly half a century later, his wait might finally be coming to an end. Support for the ousted monarchy is long frowned upon by a society that staged an uprising to overthrow the Shah's dictatorship. So what's unclear is what might be driving the renewed excitement for the royal family now. Do Iranians support the restoration of the monarchy, or are they fed up with the current theocracy?
Do not abandon the streets. My heart is with you. I know that I will soon be by your side.
Former President Hassan Rouhani could be among the leading contenders. Rouhani, who was Iran's president from 2013 to 2021, is known for his outreach to the West. In 2013, he became the first Iranian leader to engage in direct talks with the then US President Barack Obama. Another possible candidate could be Sayed Hossein Mousavian. Mousavian served as Germany's ambassador from 1990 to 1997. He was also the spokesperson for Iran's nuclear negotiation team with Europe. Mousavian is an expert in nuclear diplomacy, Iran-US relations, and regional security policy. Some even contend that there is a likelihood of the security forces taking over after they regain control of the streets. That's because there is no real heir apparent. As nationwide protests shake Iran and the security forces respond with lethal force, US President Donald Trump has raised the prospect of American intervention. Trump wrote on his Truth Social platform that Iranian authorities would pay a big price for the killings and urged people to keep protesting. He further added, "I've cancelled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. Help is on its way. MIGA." Trump used the acronym for a US-based Iranian opposition slogan, "Make Iran Great Again." Trump's recent remarks revive a familiar question. What could US action in Iran look like? Trump has not elaborated on what the US is considering, but said we're looking at some very strong options. Reportedly, he has been briefed on options for military strikes on Iran. Iran also warned that if the US attacked, both Israel and US military and shipping centers in the region would become legitimate targets. When Khamenei took power, Iran was just emerging from its long war with Iraq that left the country battered and isolated. Over the next 3 decades, Khamenei turned Iran around into an assertive power, wielding influence across the Middle East. The Iranian regime is also Israel's opponent. Tehran's nuclear weapons program, its support for proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, have put Iran at the center of Israel's national security challenges for decades. Today, the exiled Reza Pahlavi wants to help guide Iran towards free elections and equal rights for women, while leaving the decision about restoring the monarchy or not to a nationwide vote. His supporters see him as the only opposition figure with a long-standing commitment to peaceful change, but critics say he remains too dependent on foreign backing and even question whether Iranians inside the country are ready to trust any exiled leader. Whether the exiled crown prince will ever see that day or not remains one of the many unanswered questions about a nation grappling with its internal issues and a distressing past. If the regime remains in power, it is clear that the Islamic Revolution has reached its limits. After nearly 5 decades, a new generation is voicing its aspirations and refusing to accept strict Islamic laws. They seek change, a change for the better.